What I've learned over the years of doing this, and over all my time of doing this, is that, just pulling this out here, is most responses of most families is reactive, not proactive in the area of technology. In other words, parents and families don't go looking for help in this area until things go south. Most of the time, over the years, I've had tons of parents coming to me after something happens, or after they run into trouble, or after there's a train wreck. But they don't come to us before to say, you know what, I've just given my kid this device. Is there anything I need to be doing, to make sure bad things don't happen? And so most folks are reactive versus proactive. And so thank you all for being here this morning and wanting to be proactive in this area. And it's really a culture we've got to cultivate in our churches where families are taking this seriously because it's a really serious issue. And so over the course of this morning, if you've got questions at any point, we've got kind of a smaller group here. And so if you've got questions, feel free to raise a hand at any point to jump in and ask about something. Or if there's something that you want to share related to a certain topic that we cover, feel free to do that because we're just going to kind of be laid back and look at some stuff that will really help you in the area of technology. Because it doesn't matter whether you live in Dublin or in Metro Atlanta, it's everywhere. Because technology is everywhere. And we've really got to begin taking it seriously. So the number one reason I think that most families, most parents don't take it more seriously is because it's so complicated. And it takes so much effort. And so a lot of times it can feel a bit like brain surgery, figuring out how to do this stuff with your computers.
Yeah, something soft, I'm driving. Parking's an absolute nightmare around here, isn't it? Have to reverse into the tiniest of spaces. Still, I managed it. I mean, parking is not exactly brain surgery, is it? And I should know.
Why is that? Are you a doctor?
Careful, not a doctor. I'm a brain surgeon. Big difference. Big difference. Yeah, I actually know a joke about this. What's the difference between a doctor and a brain surgeon? One's not exactly brain surgery, the other is brain surgery. So, what do you guys do?
I'm an accountant.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I could do with an accountant. Filling in those tax forms can get really confusing, can't it? Still, it's not exactly brain surgery, is it? I mean, brain surgery, believe me, is very complex. Are you an accountant too?
No, I work for a charity.
Oh, that's a very selfless job, isn't it? I really admire you. I don't think I could ever do what you do. I say that because it's emotionally draining, not because it's hard. I mean, it's not exactly brain surgery, is it? Which, as a brain surgeon, is what I do.
I know what to drink. I was a brain surgeon, you know. Yeah, you mentioned it. Oh, Jeff, I think you're late at the Space Centre.
As always.
Have you met Lionel?
No, hello, Lionel.
So, Jeff, how do you earn a crust?
Well, I'm a scientist. I work mainly with rockets. It's pretty tough work. What do you do?
Why, I don't mean to boast, but I'm a brain surgeon.
Brain surgery? Oh, it's actually rocket science.
I love that little clip there because that's a lot of parents and a lot of families look at the area of technology like it's brain surgery or like it's rocket science. These devices and what goes on them, it's better just to give the devices to the kids and hope it works out for the best. In fact, 74% of parents say they do not have the time or energy to keep up with their children online. 74%. So I'll give them the device, but I don't have time to keep up with what they do with it. 80% of parents have no idea how to monitor their kids' online activities. 78% of parents believe it's more complicated to raise kids now than it was in the past. And of those who say that, 65% say the number one reason is technology. So overwhelmingly, parents and families said they don't know what to do in this area, yet over 90% of teenagers, I think the numbers actually already reached 95% of teenagers, have smartphones here in America. And so it's too complicated, it's too hard, it's too difficult to monitor and keep up with, but here, take it anyway, is the main approach of a lot of families. And I would say there's no difference among Christian families. In fact, what I hear from a lot of parents in this area is when they're talking about their kids' online activities and things that they're doing, their strategy is, well, I trust my kid. That's fantastic. I trust my 6-year-old, but I'm not going to give him the keys to the car just yet, right? So that we can do better, especially as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. We can do better in this area of technology, because technology right now is the world that our teenagers live in. It's really funny. I often talk with my high school pastor, and the assumption has always been, in middle school, the parents have to bring them to church. But in high school, they could drive and they can come on their own. It's just not true to the same degree it was when I was a kid, because so many kids don't even bother with driver's licenses. The numbers, kids are driving later and they're hanging out less. In fact, the average high school senior in 2018 spends less time out with friends than the average 8th grader did in 2009. And so seniors are spending less time out than middle schoolers were just a short number of years ago. And so it's just crazy how that culture has changed. And the reason it's changed is because of the devices. I don't have to go out and be with friends. I can be with people, and I can feel connected right here with my device in my room. And so that's what's happening. The Washington Post did a story called 13 Right Now. And it began with this paragraph. She slides into the car, and even before she buckles her seatbelt, her phone is alight in her hands. A 13-year-old girl after a day of 8th grade. She says hello. The driver asks, ready to go? She doesn't respond. Her thumb is on Instagram. A Barbara Walters meme is on the screen. She scrolls and another meme appears, then another meme, and she closes the app. She opens BuzzFeed. There's a story about Florida Governor Rick Scott, which she scrolls past to get to a story about Janet Jackson. Then 28 things you'll understand if you're both British and American. She closes it. She opens Instagram. She opens the NBA app. She shuts the screen off. She turns it back on. She opens Spotify, opens Fitbit. She has 7,427 steps, opens Instagram again, opens Snapchat. She watches a sparkling rainbow flow from her friend's mouth. She watches a YouTube star make pouty faces at the camera. She watches a tutorial on nail art. She feels the bump of the driveway and looks up. They're home. 12 minutes have passed. That's the world that they live in. That's the world that they exist in. I remember when I first saw this phenomenon when I was substitute teaching in rural Kentucky, when I was serving in West Kentucky in a rural community. I was substitute teaching in the school, and as a substitute teacher, a lot of times you have extra time on your hands. The teacher leaves you stuff, but only so much. And so we had some time off, and I said, when you're done, you guys can talk, hang out, do whatever you want. And so when they were done, a bunch of students slid all their chairs together in a group, and then they all pulled out their phones, and none of them talked to each other. They were just on their phones in a group, more interested with the interactions happening online than they were with the face-to-face people that they had just scooted their chairs to be near. And this is, 2013. That's when I first realized this has changed things in a significant way. When I was in school and we had time off, we would all circle up, but we didn't look at devices. We looked at each other. This is changing the way that students interact with their peers. It's changing the way that students interact with their families. It's changing the way they interact with their teachers. It's changing the way that they interact with their world. And we don't see it or understand it because you and I are analog people living in a digital world, essentially. Nobody here, it looks like, probably grew up with a smartphone. Okay? Didn't happen for us. We grew up with dial-up internet, some of us. Some of us remember when the internet began, right? Dial-up was fun. You went in, you logged on, it made a bunch of funny sounds, and then you were connected to the internet. And if you wanted to click on a picture and look at that, it would come in, piece by piece. You go make a sandwich, come back, and the picture would be fully loaded. It's a different world. The truth is we will always be behind the curve with our children because they've grown up with it. Just the same way that a kid who has grown up skiing is always going to have a natural ability to ski that a person who comes at it later in life is not going to have. A teenager who grew up with a smartphone is simply going to be more versed in what it does and in how it operates, and we're always going to be behind. We're always going to be lagging behind. But there are consequences. All right, so a lot of parents and families just throw up their hands and say, well, we'll just hope it all works out. But it has consequences, and a lot of those are just now coming to light. In the 5 years between 2010 and 2015, the number of teens in the United States who felt joyless and useless jumped 33%. Huge statistical leap in a very short period of time. The number of suicides among 13 to 18-year-olds jumped 31% across all backgrounds. Rich, poor, black, white, urban, rural, all of them, 31%. Kids who experienced one major depressive episode jumped 60%. So mental health just plummeted in 5 years' time. And so researchers were looking, what is an explanation for this? Because it's not demographic, it's not regional, it's not economic. What's the explanation for why mental health among teenagers has suffered so much and gone down so much just in a short time? Well, the only explanation that fit was that smartphone use among teenagers crossed 50% in 2010. And by 2015, 73% owned a smartphone. So that was the point where smartphone proliferation, the smartphones spread out among teenagers, and at the same time you see mental health plummeting in that same group. But there's also, in addition to mental health issues, there's bullying, there's pornography. Jesse Weinberger, who wrote the smartphone and internet safety book called The Boogeyman Exists and He's in Your Child's Back Pocket, said that she surveyed 70,000 children in the last 18 months and found that, on average, sexting began in the 5th grade, pornography consumption began when the child turned 8, and pornography addiction began around age 11. In fact, even on surveys, 10% of 7th graders believe that they are addicted to porn. So what does it take for a 7th grader, first of all, to come to that realization? They're not exactly well versed in addiction. But then secondly, what does it take for that same 7th grader who comes to that realization to then report it on a survey? And so at least 10% were willing to do that. According to Google Analytics, porn searches increase 4,700% when kids are not in school. 4,700% when kids are not in school. And it's probably not just the teachers, okay? That's what teenagers are doing, what children are doing with their devices. In 2016, this is 2 years ago, Pornhub, one of the largest internet pornography sites, had 64 million unique daily users. 64 million. That's 64 million different people went to this one, out of the millions of sites, this one site on the internet. Now you say, well, how many is 64 million really? The internet's a big place. Well, let's compare it with YouTube. YouTube is arguably the most popular video channel in the world. YouTube has on average 30 million daily unique users. So they ain't watching YouTube nearly at the level they're watching Pornhub, just statistically speaking. But also, not only do you have these issues of mental health, bullying, pornography, but also we're getting hooked on our phones. And if you haven't noticed this with yourself or with people in your circles, you could probably start noticing the signs in your kids. Greg Hawkmuth, he was one of Instagram's founding engineers, said this: there's always another hashtag to click on. Then it takes on its own life, like an organism, and people can become obsessive. Instagram, like so many other social media platforms, is bottomless. Facebook has an endless feed. Netflix automatically moves on to the next episode in a series. Tinder encourages users to keep swiping in search of a better option. Users benefit from these apps and websites, but also struggle to use them in moderation. According to Tristan Harris, who is a design ethicist, the problem isn't that people lack willpower. It's this. This is a great line that he says. He says, there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it is to break down the self-regulation that you have. More and more engineers and tech folks are coming out and pointing out that they have built what is essentially an addiction machine. And if adults lack the self-discipline to put it down, how much of a chance do our children stand? Not much. And if you don't believe it's a problem, just go to a restaurant and look around. Go to a restaurant with families. I don't know how it is in Dublin, but I can tell you in Metro Atlanta, you just go to a restaurant and my wife and I enjoy it. And we look around and say, wow, look at this, you know? Nobody's talking to their kids. Or go to a playground, right? We go to playgrounds a lot. Where are the parents? They're sitting on the bench with the devices. Kids are out playing. There's just a sense where we cannot stop looking. And to see that, let's see.
I can't stop looking at my phone, but I'm not alone. Over 2.5 billion people have smartphones now, and a lot of them are having a hard time putting them down.
There's a new app that aims to curb phone addiction.
Addiction is money.
Are we a nation of smartphone addicts?
The problem is, our devices are designed to keep us engaged. They're intentionally addicting. But if you understand the tricks that grab your attention, you can learn to have a healthier relationship with your phone.
I think we're living inside of 2 billion Truman shows. Where, Truman Show, you wake up and everything is sort of coordinated just for you and you usually don't even realize it. But it's coordinating just to entertain you or just to engage you.
That's Tristan Harris. He worked as Google's design ethicist, and now he runs a nonprofit initiative called Time Well Spent, advocating for awareness of how tech companies profit off of users' attention.
It's not designed to help us, it's just designed to keep us hooked.
So I handed him my phone
Yeah.
and asked him how he'd fix it. It starts with turning off all notifications, except for when a real human is trying to reach you. When you get a call, a text, or a message, it's usually because another person wants to communicate with you. But a lot of today's apps simulate the feeling of that kind of social interaction to get you to spend more time on their platform. If Facebook sends you a push notification that a friend is interested in an event near you, they're essentially acting like a puppet master, leveraging your desire for social connection so that you use the app more. But notifications didn't always work like this. When push notifications were first introduced for email on Blackberries in 2003, they were actually seen as a way for you to check your phone less. You could easily see emails as they came in, so you didn't have to repeatedly open your phone to refresh an inbox. But today you can get notifications from any app on your phone. So every time you check it, you get this grab bag of notifications that can make you feel a broad variety of emotions.
If it wasn't random, if it was predictably bad or predictably good, then you would not get addicted. The predictability would take out the addictiveness.
That's the same logic behind slot machines. And it's effective. Slot machines make more money in the US than baseball, movies, and theme parks combined. And they become addicting about 3 to 4 times faster than other kinds of gambling. Some apps even replicate the process of pulling a slot machine lever with the pull to refresh feature. That's a conscious design choice. Those apps are usually capable of continuously updating content, but the pull action provides an addicting illusion of control over that process. In the future, we might see healthier ways of delivering notifications. Research shows that bundling notifications, where phones deliver a batch of updates at set times, reduces user stress. Then, you have to grayscale your screen. The easiest way to attract your eye's attention on a screen is through color. Human eyes are sensitive to warm colors. In eye tracking tests like this one, they gravitate particularly to bright red. That's why so many apps have redesigned their icons to be brighter, bolder, and warmer over the years. It's also why notification bubbles are red. A little icon like this, or this, doesn't have the same impact on your attention as this. But you can neutralize that distracting effect by selecting a grayscale color filter in your phone's accessibility settings. When you make everything black and white, your brain isn't tricked into thinking this is any more important to you than this.
I mean, there's a reason why slot machines are, bright in color and have flashing lights and ding, 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 and they have the sensory input too, right? And so just noticing that if I take out the color, it changes the some of the addictiveness.
Finally, restrict your home screen to everyday tools.
Make sure that your home screen, when you unlock it, doesn't have anything except for the in-the-moment tools that help you live your life. I have Lyft to get somewhere when I need to get somewhere, maps, calendar. None of these are apps that I can fall into and then get sucked down some bottomless vortex of stuff.
If you're not sure what counts as a bottomless vortex of stuff, it helps to filter out apps that use infinite scrolling. Unlike pagination, where users have to click to load new content on another page, infinite scrolling continuously loads new material, so there's no built-in endpoint. Video autoplay works in a similar way. These interfaces create a frictionless experience, but they also reduce a user's sense of control and make it harder to stop. Research shows that people rely on visual cues more than internal cues to stop consuming something. In a 2005 study, individuals who ate soup out of a self-refilling bowl ate 73% more than those who ate out of a normal bowl filled up by servers. But those who ate from the self-refilling bowls didn't feel any more satisfied. So a visual cue, like an endpoint, is better at telling you the right time to stop than your own sense of satisfaction. And because so many apps don't have an endpoint, you have to build your home screen around the eventuality of distraction. We check our phones a lot. Most of us drastically underestimate how often we do so. But technology might not always look this way. There are ideas for alternative interfaces that give you functional choices and are more transparent about how much time you'll lose with one action versus another.
But it's a really deep philosophical question. What is genuinely worth your attention on an interrupted basis? Do people even know how to answer that question? It's a really hard question. It's not something we think about.
But for now, it's a question that everybody needs to start asking.
Thank you so much for watching. This has been episode.
So you may not realize it, but these little devices are designed to be addiction machines. And that's exactly how they are meant to function. That's how the designers created them. And as much as you and I try to exercise our own self-control, it's hard, especially for a lot of our children, to exercise what self-control they have. And so, what do? In light of all these issues, from pornography to internet addiction to mental health and bullying and self-harm and the different kinds of things that are out there, how do we, as Christian parents, as Christian families, be proactive in such a way that our kids' lives are not sucked into an infinite, bottomless vortex that goes who knows where and ends up who knows where? Well, the three things that we're going to look at in three different sections are how to prepare our kids, our families, for what they're going to face out there. And by the way, a lot of this stuff is good for the students, good for your kids, but also good for us as parents. We've got to practice what we preach. And so some of these things hopefully might help you as you think about how to regulate your own use with technology. But how do we prepare them for what's out there? How do we protect them from some of the stuff that's out there? And then lastly, how do we preach? How do we practice the gospel in our homes in such a way that when things do go badly with technology, we are able to address it before it gets any worse than it is? So with that, anybody initially, before we dive into preparing, anybody have any initial questions or thoughts about some of these, the new culture that we have with technology, or any of the challenges that we face? I'll give you a moment if you have any questions or thoughts based on this from your own experience on some of the challenges that are out there. Everybody's good and ready to go. All right. Well, let's talk about prepare. We have got to prepare our kids for what they will encounter. And this is not easy because a lot of times it means beginning a conversation on something we don't want to talk about. It means going places we don't feel comfortable going and doing things we don't necessarily feel comfortable doing. But we've got to do it because if we don't, the world, and nowadays through technology, will take care of that for us. Are we willing to push our kids out of the nest in order to prepare them for what they're going to face? And so to illustrate that, I have my friends, the geese. The barnacle geese.
launch. And a controlled drop. This is as good a descent as it's possible to make.
Just wait for it.
Its parents are there to meet it. A little dazed, perhaps, but all in one piece. One gosling at least hasn't made it. And this chick appears to be in a bad way. At last, it responds to its mother's calls. The resilience of a barnacle goose chick is extraordinary. But there are still chicks unaccounted for, somewhere amongst the rubble. The parents can't risk searching because they need to lead their two survivors away quickly before predators arrive. A third one has made it. But it needs to catch up. Reunited. 3 out of 5 chicks have made it. Without such a dramatic start in life, it's unlikely any of them would have even got this far.
Without such a dramatic start, it's unlikely any of them would have ever gotten this far. And it's painful to watch, and obviously you can only push the analogy so far. We're not content if only 3 out of our 5 of our kids make it. But it's painful to watch that little chick make that jump and then hit some rocks on the way down. But if it wasn't for that, the chick wouldn't survive to adulthood at all. And it's the same way with our kids. When we talk about preparing them for what's out there, it can feel to us as parents like that baby goose hitting those rocks, because we got to talk about things or address things or come back to and spend time with things that are uncomfortable or unpleasant. But if we don't train them, then the world will be fine indoctrinating them into its own value system. And so what we encourage our parents to do and what we push folks towards is training their children versus sheltering their children. And there's a huge difference between the two. When you try to shelter your kid, you try to control. You want to control the outcomes. You want to control what happens to them. But in training, you begin with the acknowledgement that you can't. You can't possibly control what happens with your kids. Obviously, you have a degree of control, right? I mean, you have a little bit as a parent, but the world is such a place that no matter how much control you have, it can slip away in a moment. I can line up for you families who believe they had everything under control only to find out they didn't. And so in training, we acknowledge we can't control everything, so we got to prepare them. In sheltering, you try to build a bubble. Keep all the bad stuff out. But in training, you try to inoculate against the disease. All right? We're gonna help train you and prepare you for what you're going to face. In sheltering, you try to prevent things from happening. In training, you try to prepare for what's going to happen. In sheltering, all is lost if you fail. If the shelter lets something through and your child takes a hit, all is lost. But in training, failure is an opportunity to learn and get better and get wiser. In sheltering, one day the value ends. One day they will graduate from high school. One day they will move out of the house, and your ability to shelter will be done. But in training, the value lasts a lifetime. Because ultimately you're preparing them to survive in a world without you. And without you having constant control over the aspects of their life. And so what we want to push towards, I think biblically and also Christianly, is not sheltering, but towards training. It doesn't mean we don't protect our kids from what's out there. We're going to talk about that for sure. You wouldn't try to, if you decided you wanted to run a marathon, 26.2 miles, and you weren't a runner, you wouldn't go out and try to do it in your first week. In the same way, we're not expecting our kids to go out there and be Christian technological ninjas on the first time they get a device. But at the same point, we want to help build them up to the point where they are able to handle and they're prepared for what they might encounter in the world. And the reason we do this is because you can't escape the world. You can do everything you want, and you can try everything at your disposal. But at the end of the day, if there's one thing I've learned in 13 years of student ministry, it's you can't escape the world. I remember the very first time I encountered pornographic images. I was in the 7th grade. I guess I would have been 12 years old. And this is back when the internet was new, and a friend had printed pornographic images off of a printer. Old school, okay? Nobody would do that anymore, but that's what he did. Printed off those images, brought them to class, and passed them around the back row of class where we all sat. That was the first time. I still don't think my parents know about that. Right? That's right. Mom, Dad, if you're watching this. But they wouldn't be surprised, I don't think, because of other discussions we've had. But that was the very first time I ever encountered it. And then the time when I first encountered internet pornography was also as a 13-year-old when I was in a Nintendo chat room. A chat room where you're talking about video games. And back then, video games were all rated for children. Right? They didn't have M for mature games back then. So you're talking a pretty safe, sanitized environment, talking about games like Super Mario Brothers and The Legend of Zelda. And this person I'm talking to says, hey, you want to go and see something more fun than this? Sure. Well, and he posts a link up in the chat room. I click the link, and it takes me right into a sex chat room. Boom. There I was, age 13, no knowledge of any of this. And all of a sudden, all of it was on display for my education. And nobody knew anything about it except for me. And to make matters worse, and this is the way it was back in the 90s, because the internet was brand new. Nobody really was aware of much of what was going on. For me, it was 7 years from that moment until I was in college, my sophomore year, before I heard any pastor or Christian leader talk about internet porn. So for 7 years, figure it out on your own, kid, the church had nothing to say. And so, as believers, as parents and pastors, we can't let that continue, right? Not that every week you got to be hammered on it, but just realize this is where a lot of our kids are. I mean, goodness, I teach a class for a homeschool co-op that meets at our church, Timothy Ministry, right? They had me do a a biblical manhood study. And in the study, they asked the question, when was the last time you looked at porn? And they had to write it down on a sheet of paper and turn it into me. And I won't say the percentage, but let's just say a majority all could point to a time in the not too distant past at a homeschool co-op. So we just need to be real about what's going on in this area. We cannot escape the world. And if we pretend like it's not out there, all we're doing is we're saying, hey, I know you're 13 years old. You don't have any wisdom. You barely know your faith. But I want you to figure this out by yourself. Right? Because that's what's happening with a lot of our students. Because when our kids do encounter what's out there, we probably won't be around. I mean, I don't know anybody with the story, yeah, the first time I ran into trouble on the internet, my parents were right there to talk me through it and explain it to me. Or I ran into trouble out in the world with my friends. They were there to walk me through it every step of the way. Nobody has that story. You might have that story. You might be the exception. But for the most part, everybody kind of finds themselves in those situations on their own. If we've not prepared them, they won't know how to process it and what to do with it. And so we want to make sure that we're aware of that. Public school kids. I don't know if you guys are public school around here, private school, if anybody homeschools. But what we found is that public school kids, the danger is like the danger I experienced. Right? Some of their friends are going to show them something, and they're not going to have to print it out. Right? They're just going to be able to show them on a device, expose them to things, talk about things that you as a parent don't know about. And you say, oh goodness, that's terrible. That leads a lot of parents to pull their kids out of public schools, especially where we are, and put them in homeschools, which is great, only a lot of times it's worse. Because when you go to homeschool, you're now spending the majority of your day in front of a device. And so what we found is the public school kids are at school, they don't have the time to access it, and the devices there are all protected, but they go home, the homeschool kids, they are amazing with the devices because that's where they spend all their time, and guess what? All of their time is not well spent. And so I don't think there's a difference danger-wise in this between homeschool and public school or private school that I've seen. I have not seen any difference between the two, as far as the relative danger that you could experience as a parent. Not to say that there's not certain choices that may be better for your family or worse, but there's not a difference there. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, oh, well, there's that. I forgot I had that. There it is. Look at that. The notes. He said in Matthew 10:16, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Boy, that's my prayer for my kids. That they would be as wise as serpents, that they would be prepared and equipped for what they're going to run into, but as innocent as doves, that they would be able to avoid the big pitfalls and the big traps and the things that can drag them down and ensnare them. That's my hope and prayer, and that's the hope and prayer for every student in our student ministry. They'd be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves, because in our world they are increasingly in the midst of wolves, and some of them are in the midst of wolves 24/7 with their phones and their devices. And by the way, a word about this as well. The world would not be a problem. The internet, apps, social media would not be a problem if our children were not sinners. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Our enemies are the world, the flesh, and the devil. But ultimately, the world and the devil can do nothing to us if not for the flesh. Exactly. So we've just got to realize that our kids, oh, there we go, got a message. We got to realize that our kids are, as sinners, predisposed towards this stuff. I mean, I've heard this story so many times. When a kid finds something on the internet they shouldn't look at, usually the first reaction is not to turn it off and throw it away. I want to see more. That's the first reaction. Why? Because the flesh within us. And so ultimately we've got to remember, as parents, as we prepare our kids, our desire is to form their hearts and form their desires, because their natural bent is away from God. Their natural bent is towards sin. And so because of that, we need to make sure that in our preparations, we are preparing them as sinners to go out into a world that has lots of temptations to sin. That's ultimately why sheltering also fails, because your biggest enemy is inside the shelter. And we can also list families who have seen that come true. And so we got to bear that in mind as well. And so we got to prepare for what's out there. We got to prepare for what's out there. And right now I want to give you just some practical ways that we practice in our family, that other families practice in. Our oldest is in first grade now, which means we are about to cross into the range. For me, second grade is really, we're already preparing now. But ultimately, once you get to 8 years old, you're in prime time for this stuff to begin being an issue. As soon as a kid has access to a device, you're in prime time for them to encounter this. And even though in our house, we don't even, and I'll talk more about this, we don't even have devices, really. We got a TV. But guess who does have devices? Grandma and Grandpa. I've heard this a lot. Even parents who are like, we're totally protected at home, guess what happens? The kid goes to Grandma's house, gets Grandma's device, and look at what Grandma has been doing on her phone. Oh my Lordy. Actually, it wasn't Grandma. It was the kids who got Grandma's device because Grandma's device was unprotected. And so all that to say, we just need to be prepared for what's out there. First thing you can do is have conversations. Well, I'm going to get to that. First thing you do is have conversations. Josh McDowell, who's been doing this since the days of Noah on the ark, recommends that you begin sex, marriage, and gender talks as early as kindergarten. And he's right. Your kids need to know from an early age, boys and girls, appropriate touches, inappropriate touches. Here's what marriage is, okay? Here's the parts of the body. We need to have those discussions early on because it starts early in the world that we live in. And I would say the main argument for that is the Bible. You know, I've had parents before come and say, can we just not talk about certain subjects? And I say, well, do you encourage your kids to read the Bible? Yes. So which parts do you have them skip? Because I'll be honest, the Bible's going to be a lot more immature, going to be a lot more racy, I don't know if that's the right word, than I'm going to be. Just start, and you don't even have to get to Song of Solomon, right? Song of Solomon gets its reputation for being, oh my goodness, but just Genesis. You don't have to go far. You got Judah and Tamar, you got Abraham's, you got Israel's daughter Dinah. I mean, it just starts, sexual sin starts early in the Bible, and then it just keeps getting worse. And so the Bible's not afraid of any of these things. And we shouldn't be either. Doesn't mean you're not age sensitive. Doesn't mean you don't take that into consideration, how old they are. I'm not like, hey, let's have family study time. I got my 4-year-olds and my 6-year-old. Let's do Judah and Tamar today. Right? No, I'm not doing that. But at the same time, we as parents need to realize the Bible's not afraid of these things because it's aware of the world that we live in. We as parents should not be either. So conversations. And you say, when do we need to have those conversations? All the time. Not that you're all the time pulling your kids aside and saying, let's go over what makes a boy again, or things like that. But this is a constant open discussion in your home. Because here's the mistake a lot of folks make. We're going to talk about it once. The birds and the bees, when they're old enough, and we're going to cover that. No. I don't know about your children, but I know if I tell them one time to do something, it's like I didn't even say it. Right? I've got to say it 4,742 times, and then it maybe registers. That means that this is a constant, ongoing discussion. Not that you're sitting around the dinner table please don't do that. Sitting around the dinner table every night saying, well, time to talk about the birds and the bees again. But it is a constant, ongoing discussion in your home that you are comfortable with having with your kids. And I'm just talking about sexuality, but I'm talking about all the different things that they may encounter out there at the appropriate time, in the appropriate age, in an age-appropriate way. You're having those kinds of discussions in your home, because only with the regular, that's the big mistake. When I talk to my generation, one day I'm going to do a survey, and I'm just going to collect from my generation all the ways that their parents handled the birds and the bees talk, and it's going to be hilarious. Because it really is funny how that was done with my generation. But the biggest number one mistake was not even the way it was handled, but that it was only handled once. And then it was never spoken of again. And so we got to do better with our generation. We just do. Because the internet's not going to just come at them one time. Technology's not going to just come at them one time. But with that, another big thing, in addition to conversations, is habits. The habits your kids have make a huge difference. John Owen, the Puritan author, said, "He that makes it his business to eat daily of the tree of life will have no appetite unto other fruit, though the tree that bare them seem to stand in the midst of paradise." What's he saying? We got to develop the right kinds of appetites in our kids. And we do that through habits. Some of the habits that kids need to have. Church. They got to be in church. They got to go whenever you guys meet, Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, camp, the things that you do. They've got to be involved in the life of the church. It's an important habit for kids to have. And it makes a huge difference. It really does in the amount of help that they can get in this area. The Bible. Kids need to be in the habit of reading and interacting with God's Word. Again, you're forming their appetites. You're shaping their heart with these things. Prayer. Once again, the habit of prayer. Learning how to talk to their Heavenly Father. Serving. Get your kids serving the kingdom in some way. And hopefully even in some regular way. Delighting in the Lord. Shaping them to find delight and joy in their Heavenly Father and in Jesus Christ. Healthy, non-screen activities. So that was very spiritual. This is less spiritual, but spiritual still. Healthy, non-screen activities. The more time kids have with the screen, the more potential there is for negative outcomes. So play a sport. Play a musical instrument. Get them involved. Do stuff together as a family. Have healthy, non-screen activities that they are involved in. Reading. Have them read. It's incredibly powerful. It'll help their attention span. Listen, I know families, they say, listen, you want to play video games? Okay, here's how it'll work. For every minute you read of a book, that's a minute you get to play video games. It's not a bad arrangement. You don't have to do that, but crazy thoughts, then at least they're having to earn that time and they're spending that time not just in front of a screen. And when I say read, I do tend to lean, and this may be because I'm old school and a bit of a curmudgeon, but I do prefer the paper books, because if you're like, hey, read this on your Kindle, it doesn't take long to get off of that onto something else. So I do recommend the paper books, but reading is a good activity. And relationships. Just make sure they have healthy relationships in the family, with their friends, with other people. All of those things, healthy habits, make a huge difference in the effect that technology has on kids. When I've seen really bad outcomes in the lives of teenagers, these habits are not present. They're not reading the Bible. They're not regularly in church. They don't have other things they're involved in. It's just them and the devices with no spiritual influence and with no outside influence. So habits are huge. The habits you build into your family and into your home make a big difference in this area. And not only habits, ultimately, but guidelines.
Like. Guys, honestly, 5 more minutes. Like.
Oh, it's so nice to all be sitting down together. You can tell me something they did today.
I drew a horsey.
Good for you, son. Anyone have a charger? I'm at like 2%.
I'm not hungry.
What's wrong, sweetheart?
I miss Daddy.
I know. We all miss him.
I miss him more.
Oh, no, I miss him the
I
most.
miss him a lot.
Don't
I
worry.
miss him.
so
Hey,
much more.
hey, everyone shut up. This filter makes me look like a cat. It's so funny, it's making me cry.
So, sweetie, tell me about your day.
Well, today, actually, I was driving to the grocery store, and I saw a dog.
Oh, you saw a dog?
Daddy, put your phone in the basket.
The basket's so crowded, though.
Just put it in.
Oh, wait.
Put it in the basket. The basket.
Put it in the basket, right?
It's an easy thing. Just put it in the basket.
Please put it in the basket. Right. See what we can get this me up to.
As long as it's in the basket, though, you can technically still touch it, right?
Guidelines. Hopefully you're not that way at the dinner table, though I've known some who are. This is a really important part of it. Conversations, habits, is the proactive side. It's the positive side. There's a negative side to this as well. And guidelines is a key part of that you have control over. You got some power as a parent in this area. You can limit technology access in the home. You have total control over that. Why? Because your kids ain't paying any bills. They're not. I mean, maybe you've got a kid who's 17, they got a job on their own, but you know what? They didn't pay for the house. I bet they're not paying for the internet connection. Okay? And so, as the parent in the home, you have ultimate control over the number and location and access of devices. And so I may say something here that you do. I'm not coming down on you, maybe a little bit, but I don't know you. So, know some of you. But television in kids' room, I don't think that was ever a good idea. It was not a good idea when my parents did it. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. You actually have control over that, over what they can see and access. Computer with full internet connection in the bedroom where they can close the door. Once again, you got control. And the fewer the number of devices and the more public the locations of those devices, the better off you're going to be. The more private access to devices your kids have, just be honest, the more trouble they can get into and the more of these problems that can begin to show up in their lives. And they run everywhere from the benign. So we've got kids in our group who just play video games constantly, every night till 1 in the morning. Every night till 1 in the morning. And that's unfortunate. And it's not good for them. But that's what happens. But then there's also extreme situations that you read about in news media, that you see. The National Center for Exploited Children just put out an ad that I'm not going to show because it is so creepy, that just depicts the exploitation of a teenage girl who has a computer in her room by herself, who's talking with a guy that she thinks cares about her. She sends him a video. Then he threatens to release that video to all of her friends, to tag her in it, to post it all over social media if she doesn't send him more images and more videos, according to his request. And then she becomes blackmailed into this. And this happens apparently a lot, so much so that the National Center decided to release a PSA about it. So there's a spectrum, right? Everything from the kid that's playing too many video games, too much time on Fortnite, all the way to the kids who experience real-life trauma because of this. And a lot of it begins with having just their own TV, their own computer, their own device in their bedroom. In fact, I read this from a well-known family psychologist, was talking about he had all these families coming to him with the same issue. My kids' grades are failing. They're struggling in school. Before, they had been great. They were getting their straight A and B students. They always did their homework. And now all of a sudden, their performance has fallen off. They're struggling to stay awake in class, and we can't figure what it is. And so he studied the phenomenon, and here's what he found out. These kids were having a hard time paying attention and staying focused in class and staying awake and getting their work done because they were sleeping with their cell phones. And so they were responding to text messages and notifications at 2, 3, 4 in the morning every night. And something like that just leads to failing grades, and the parents had no idea. They thought their kids had some kind of biological issue We need some kind of medication. You need a medication. It's called guidelines. Putting a limit on things. And you have control over that as parents. And so I would just think through it. Think through it in your home, what your strategy is going to be, and how you want to organize your home in such a way that technology doesn't have the ability to suck your kids into an infinite vortex. I like that phrase, infinite vortex. I need to use that more often. You also have the ability as parents to limit technology time in the home. There's various ways that this is done. Some families have a charger station. They put it in the kitchen or in a public place where when you come home, all the devices go on to the charger station and they stay there until it's time to leave the next day. It's an incredible gift to your kids. It's the gift they never knew they wanted. So we have twins. We have twin boys who are each 4 years old. My wife always calls it the gift we never knew we wanted. That's what something like this is to your kids. Because when you and I grew up, our phones were attached to the wall. Right? Anybody remember that time? Okay, if you wanted to call somebody, you went to the wall, you pulled it off the hook, you maybe even, like I did, dialed the number, right? And then you talked to the person, and when you're done, you actually hung it up. Right? Where we get all that terminology from. And if you wanted to have a private conversation, in my home, the cord was only so long. So I still remember walking with that phone all the way down the hallway, away from the kitchen, and then I would be talking, and the phone would just slip and go sling across the kitchen, nail a cabinet, my parents would yell at me. Some of you may remember that experience. And then, of course, we got remote phones. Remember those? They sat on the station and had an antenna out of the top, and you could carry it anywhere in the house. That was great, except my parents kept the receiver in their room. So at any point, you could go in and push the button and listen to the conversation. If only, right? But you know what the cool thing about that was? I would come home every day from school, and no matter what had happened at school, no matter if a friend had rejected me, or if I had been made fun of, or if I didn't get invited to something, I didn't know or think about it the whole time I was home. Why? Because I had no idea. I had no reminders of the things that had happened or what was going on without me being there. But kids now, constant. Especially with teenage girls, but also with guys. I mean, all they got to do is pop open their Instagram feed or whatever it is that they use, and they're constantly reminded of all the things that they fall short in or that they weren't invited to or how bad their life is in comparison with others. And so by setting guidelines and by setting limits, you give your kid the gift of not being constantly reminded of everything happening out there in the world with everybody that they know. Like we didn't have to grow up with. So, charging stations. Setting the hours for the Wi-Fi. We're going to talk about how to do that during the next section on Protect. Setting up guidelines, like the trading time reading. You can read, or go practice a sport. If every minute you do that, then you can come in and have some time with the screens, or however you want to set it up. But you get the ability to limit technology time in the home. Not only the access to it, but also the time spent on it. And then finally, set or write your expectations for use. When you give your kid a device, say, here's the contract. And if you want, I don't have any with me, if you want a cell phone contract, you can email me. You can message me, I'll send you one. You can also Google it. Cell phone contract, and then sit down, write, and create your own. And say, here's how we expect you to use this device. If you do it correctly, you get to use it. If you do it wrongly, here are the consequences. And then have them agree to it. I agree that if I use my device in such a way, then I will lose access to that device for 1 week or 1 month or whatever you set out as a family. Make sure they know the expectations with the device before you give it to them. Guidelines. So all of those are right there. So limit technology access in the home, limit technology time in the home, and set family expectations for technology use with consequences if violated. I know that seems like a lot of work, but if you're going to spend the money on the device, if you're going to drop $500 on an iPhone, $1,000 on an iPhone, $1,500 on an iMac, whatever it is you put in your home, $100 on a Roku, whatever you put in there, just make sure that you are prepared to address the issues that come with it. Now, why do this? Why? Because, after all, doesn't this seem like helicopter parenting or a violation of privacy or something like that? Well, here's one little thing that I think is pretty interesting. It's really a game changer for me. The Monitoring the Future survey, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse and designed to be nationally representative, has asked 12th graders more than 1,000 questions every year since 1975. It's asked 8th and 10th graders since 1991. The survey asks teens how happy they are and also how much of their leisure time they spend on various activities, including non-screen activities such as in-person social interaction and exercise. And in recent years, screen activities such as using social media, texting, and browsing the web. The results could not be clearer. Teens who spend more time than average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy. And those who spend more time than average on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. There's not a single exception. So that means if your kid is spending the majority of their time in screen activities, they're going to be unhappier than if they did not. That alone is enough to limit it. That alone right there. And as parents, we do have control over that to a great degree. I know some of us, our kids may have classes, they may have responsibilities online. Certain. You've got to figure out, these are not, in saying you need to create the guidelines, it's exactly what I'm saying. They need to work with and for your family. But at the end of the day, there needs to be some, because we maybe unknowingly as parents have spent $500 to increase our children's unhappiness. Oops. Hashtag fail. And so we just need to be aware of that. And here's a little video to illustrate that.
The amount of time that little kids spend with small screens has skyrocketed in the last 5 years. As an education reporter and a mom, I wanted to know how much screen time is too much. I talked to dozens of experts and surveyed over 500 families and came up with 3 simple rules. And yes, they're inspired by food writer Michael Pollan. Enjoy screens, not too much, mostly together. Rule number 1, enjoy screens. Whether you want your kid to be great at the arts, design, business, or science, they'll need tech skills too. That means using devices as tools for creation, discovery, and connection. Children learn by playing. Why not invite them to go beyond passive viewing? By sending emojis to grandma, or trying out a coding language like Scratch Jr. Rule number 2, not too much. Too much screen time contributes to poor sleep, obesity, and the risk of negative mental, social, and emotional outcomes. Tips for cutting back include: shut down screens well before bedtime. The blue light keeps people awake. Don't swipe while you eat. That includes you too, parents. Mindless eating with a side dish of media can drive up the risk of obesity, and it crowds out family time. Don't let screens trap your kid indoors. They need to get outside and play every day. Rule number 3, mostly together. It can be easy to treat a screen as a babysitter, but kids often need help understanding what they see. Talk with your kids about what they're watching or doing online. Ask them to show you the latest app or game, or put on a music video and dance together. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to screen time, but these 3 little rules should help your kids and you maintain a healthy balance. Ani Kamenetz, NPR News, New York.
That's just a good little primer. As a reminder, screens can be enjoyable. And in preparing our kids, we're going to have to prepare them for technology. You know, some parents say, well, does this mean, I shouldn't give my kid a device until they're 18? No. And by the way, popular question I get is, when is the right time for them to get a device? When is the right time to get a social media? And I always say the same thing. It depends on the kid. It totally does. There are kids able to handle device in 8th grade. There are kids who are not able to handle device at 48. And so with that, that's a decision that you need to make as a family together. I usually say err on the side of caution, right? So if you're not really sure, maybe hold off. But at the same time, we do want our kids to be able to enjoy screens, and I love that advice as well. Not too much, and enjoy them together. There's one TV in our house. We all enjoy it together. This drives our kids crazy many, many times. But at the same time, that makes it easy for us to enjoy them together. So I don't want to clog up the plumbing. Keep it simple in what you guys come up with. So, with that said, you guys have been going for an hour and 10 minutes, which is good because that is the biggest section that I have. So we'll take about a 10-minute break, Stephen. Does that sound good? And then we will come back and talk about the thing that you really want to hear about, how to protect. So, break time.